This is the Resistance Report for September 11th, 2017. 16 years ago today, you may remember exactly where you were and what you were doing when you got the news about the attack on the United States, in which more than 3,000 Americans perished. Our hearts and our sympathies go out to the families and friends of those Americans and to the thousands more who have been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan as a result of wars started because of that attack. Wars that, it turned out, had little or nothing to do with the attack. The dead and injured have also included thousands of Iraqis and Afghanis, and those wars, in one form or another, continue today. Meanwhile, today, much of the Gulf Coast of the United States is underwater or bailing out. Hurricane Irma has been downgraded, but it's now drenching Georgia and South Carolina in massive bands of rain stretching from its center, causing flooding all the way up to Charleston, South Carolina. Now, permit me, please, to say this. Conservatives don't like regulation or social insurance, and they don't believe in climate change, but with large portions of America now grappling with the effects of two of the worst hurricanes to hit in years, it is time to have a frank discussion. First, on regulations. Nobody likes regulations, like nobody likes taxes, but they are necessary. Many towns and cities are located in coastal areas and floodplains, where building codes are often insufficient in reducing damage from extreme events. You need strong building codes. Houston already has some of the laxest building regulations for structures and potential flood zones anywhere. And Donald Trump administration, they want to extend that policy across the United States. Just days before Harvey formed in the Atlantic in August, Trump signed an executive order overturning an Obama policy to help American communities and businesses become more resilient against the risks of flooding. That Obama-era directive established flood risk standards for federally funded infrastructure projects that are built in areas prone to flooding or subject to the effects of sea level rise. Like many of those now sinking in Texas. Hello? As the climate changes, we need stronger, not weaker, building standards and building codes and zoning regulations. There's also the issue of toxic wastes. The Houston area is home to at least 41 of the nation's most hazardous toxic waste sites. Water inundated 13 of these so-called Superfund sites, and now risks poisoning surrounding floodwater, soil, people, mostly low-income minority people. A Superfund site, by the way, is any land in the United States that's been contaminated by hazardous waste and identified over the years by the EPA as a candidate for cleanup because it poses a risk to human health or the environment. There were at least 80 toxic Superfund sites in Irma's path. These toxic waste sites have to be secured before a storm hits, or else toxic chemicals can spread into groundwater. And yet, here again, Trump and his EPA administrator, Scott Pruitt, what have they done? They have cut or eliminated climate change preparedness efforts at Superfund sites. This is insane, folks. Now, conservatives also rail at social insurance. Social insurance. They don't like social insurance. They don't like it because social insurance, they say, is all about big government. But let me just tell you something. The whole idea of social insurance is to pool our resources so those resources can help those in need, such as people in Southeast Texas and in Florida. And right now, there's not nearly enough money to do the job with regard to just these two hurricanes. Harvey could be the costliest natural disaster in U.S. history. With a potential price tag, they're now talking about $180 billion. That was the combined cost of Hurricanes Katrina and Sandy. Irma is one of the 5 biggest hurricanes to hit the United States in history. It is now being downgraded and it is losing some of its force, but it is still huge. Last Friday, Trump signed a $15 billion disaster relief package. That's hours after it passed the House with a bipartisan majority. That's $15 billion. Let me just make sure you understand that. $15 billion is a tiny fraction of the estimated $180 billion needed just for Harvey. But here's the interesting thing. 90 House Republicans voted against this relief package, including 4 from Texas. Texas Republican Senators John Cornyn and Ted Cruz backed the bill, even though they didn't back the disaster relief bill for Hurricane Sandy. But I want to single out the 4 Texas House representatives who refused relief for their fellow Texans. Joe Barton, Jeb Hensarling, Sam Johnson, and Mac Thornberry. Do they think their constituents don't want to help other Texans? I mean, maybe they don't want to help other Americans, but how about other Texans? Maybe they don't even know that the Texas Gulf Coast is part of Texas. At least most House Republicans and virtually all Senate Republicans voted for this down payment on relief. It really is a down payment. But bear in mind that before Harvey, Trump and the Republicans were getting ready to rescind nearly $876 million from the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Disaster Relief Fund. They were just going to get rid of it. So the question has got to come to their minds, where will the $180 billion come from? And it may be more than $180 billion. I have a suggestion, a humble suggestion, and that is, how about eliminating the big defense buildup that Trump wants? How about even cutting defense? We already spend in this country more on the military than the next 5 largest military budgets around the world put together. Now, the third thing that conservatives hate to talk about, and they don't like, is climate change. I mean, even the words climate change are words that are anathema to a lot of conservatives. Scott Pruitt, the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, says we shouldn't be discussing climate change now. He said, quote, I'm quoting him, to use this time and effort to address climate change at this point is very, very insensitive. Insensitive? Let me tell you something. If we don't talk about climate change now, when the public's attention is riveted on the consequences, when exactly are we going to talk about it? And when exactly are we going to demand action? Isn't this a, as they say, teachable moment? You see, the reality is Pruitt and Trump don't want to talk about climate change ever. Trump has said climate change is a hoax. Pruitt has declared that carbon dioxide emissions from cars, power plants, other sources, they are not major causes of global warming, he says, despite overwhelming scientific evidence to the contrary. Pruitt's Environmental Protection Agency has removed many mentions of climate change from its own website. It's rolling back regulations aimed at curbing carbon dioxide emissions. Even Florida Governor Rick Scott, he refuses to use the words climate change. Well, I'm sorry. It is real. It is happening. And here is the reality, folks. None of us should be reluctant to say what the reality is, and say it now and say it clearly. Climate change is causing 3 things that are contributing to massive hurricanes and other damage, according to scientific findings. Number 1, because of climate change, ocean levels are rising. So you've got, this is Scott Pruitt. You see, oceans are rising as glaciers and portions of the Arctic and the Antarctic melt. Here we have the world, and here we have the Antarctic, and here we have what's left of the permafrost and other areas, and here we have Canada and the United States, and we have, well, Canada and the United States, and here we have Mexico, and here we have Latin America. And what's happening as all of this begins to melt, obviously sea levels are going higher, which means higher storm surges and flooding when hurricanes hit. Storms and flooding are becoming costlier and more frequent. Storm surges are getting bigger, inundating low-lying coastal areas, sweeping away everything in their path, and climate change is the leading culprit, and everybody knows it. So, number one, you've got oceans are rising. Not Ocean's 11, oceans are rising. Number two, climate change is also causing warmer seas. So you've got all of these oceans around the world that themselves are heating up. And you've got fish and other creatures that are getting warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer. And you see, this contributes to bigger and fiercer hurricanes. Average sea surface temperatures have been rising. Some parts of the North Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico are warmer than they have been in many years now, which is a key reason why both Harvey and Irma became so strong so quickly. And this is an important point, because scientists aren't prepared to say climate change has caused specifically Irma and specifically Harvey. It is the conditions of both oceans rising and also oceans heating that have given rise to far greater possibility of these kinds of giant hurricanes. The third is that climate change is also warming the atmosphere. That is the air. The sun, that's the sun, and the atmosphere around the Earth are getting warmer and warmer, which contributes to more rainfall from hurricanes. That's the connection. A warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture. So even if the same storm in a warmer planet happens, it gives you more rainfall. We're getting heavier rainfall, not only in hurricanes, also in weaker storms across the world. Even relatively mild tropical storms are causing great damage by dropping huge volumes of rain over one area. And here's Scott Pruitt holding an umbrella. It's not going to work, Scott. Anyone, even Donald Trump and Scott Pruitt, should be able to see this. The number of billion-dollar events, I've talked about natural disasters ranging from flooding to wildfires that incur more than $1 billion of damages. The number of these billion-dollar events has risen over the past few decades, increasing in cost from roughly $10 billion over 5 years, that's a 5-year average, in 1985, to more than $50 billion, a 5-year average in 2015. Now, this season that we're in now has already been remarkable because 2 major hurricanes with sustained winds of more than 110 miles per hour have hit the United States mainland after a period of 12 years when none of the biggest, strongest storms made America landfall. The lives and livelihoods of millions of Americans are at risk as long as Trump and his administration continue to deny the existence of climate change and its impacts, getting out of the Paris Accords, rolling back environmental protections. They're taking us into more and more dangerous territory for no reason but to satisfy an ideology that has no bearing on the real problems facing America. And so we have been through a giant learning experience And it's very important we see it that way. Now, it's time for your questions, which I have not seen. Tony Santi, when will we hear about the Mueller probe? I have absolutely no idea, Tony. I think the Mueller probe, now this is just judging from public information that we all get, but it seems to be moving into a different phase, a phase in which there may be indictments and also warrants. There is cooperation with the IRS. There is also a great deal of cooperation with the U.S. Attorney in New York. And that, to me, means that we are likely to hear more, certainly over the next couple of months. What's interesting to me, Tony, is that we haven't had very many leaks. I mean, the press usually has very, very strong connections to what's going on in a particular investigation. Not very many leaks about it. So I'd give it sometime in the fall. That would be my estimate. Fred Meald or Heald? Fred, which is it? Heald or Meald? I'm going to say Meald. How do we get massive money out of politics? Fred, we do it, and this is not, again, terribly difficult. It's politically very difficult, obviously, because everybody who's elected has, not everybody, but most elected officials have a stake in the present system. They got into their positions because they attracted, and this is true of most Democrats as well as Republicans, a lot of money. The way to get out of this, and granted the Supreme Court has set up a lot of roadblocks calling money speech and calling corporations people, but there's still a lot of things we can do. We as individuals, we could do it at the state level. For example, and some states already have done this, set up funds that provide matching funds for politicians that get small donations. So for example, every small donation of let's say under $20 would be matched dollar for dollar, or maybe double matched by the state or the federal government. And those funds could come from a small checkoff, just a checkoff on your tax return. You want to contribute to that kind of a fund. We can also have stricter regulations on the revolving door between government and business. We can have full disclosure. I mean, that might help of where every dollar comes from in terms of dollars that go into campaigns. But we need legislators with the courage to do this. And in order to give legislators the courage to do this, you and I and everybody we know have got to make getting big money out of politics a major goal. To me, it has to be the major goal. How do we get anything done if we don't get big money out of politics? Marjorie Baxter, what are the chances that Medicare-for-all will pass? Marianne, I'm sorry. Marianne, I think the chances are getting better and better. We're going to see over the next couple of months more and more Democrats, Senate Democrats, who are going to get on the bandwagon with regard to Medicare-for-all. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and others are already co-sponsoring a bill that would be a Medicare-for-all bill. In the House, a lot of Democrats are getting on this particular bandwagon as well. And I think the House and the Senate Democrats are going to make it a major issue in 2018. And why are they doing that? Because so many, they're hearing back from so many Americans, they want Medicare-for-all. The system we have now is completely crazy, costly, inefficient, costs us enormous amounts of money, and does not deliver good health care. Final question from Pat Reynolds. How much longer can Republicans deny climate change? Do their voters care? Pat, very good and important question. I think that Republicans are going to have a harder and harder time denying it because so much of the country is being subjected to such wild weather. And so many people, particularly people who are older than 20 or 30, remember how weather used to be. I mean, it's not just hurricanes, it's also droughts, it's also temperatures. I mean, here I hardly have standing, given what's happened in southeast Texas and the South and in Georgia and Florida. But even here in the Bay Area of California, we are seeing temperatures we've never seen before, not since the 1870s. Temperatures over the last 2 weeks that have reached 90, I think 105, 104 degrees. So all over the country, people are experiencing this, and they're looking for answers, and they're saying something is strange, something's going wrong. And so I think now is a teachable moment. I think it's going to be harder and harder for people to deny this. But it's very important that Democrats and progressives get out there and say, this is happening, and we've got to face it, and we've got to do all of the kinds of things that I talked about today. So I want to thank you for your questions. Thank you for tuning in. I want to thank Sasha Lightman and also Andrew Santana for their help in this production. And I want to ask you to continue to fight. I know it is hard. I know it's exhausting. I know a lot of you say, I thought he'd be gone. Trump would be gone by now. And many of you say to yourselves, even if he's gone, we've got to deal with this administration. We've got to deal with a vice president who may be in some ways even worse than Donald Trump, although I don't think so. But let me just say, it's your activism. It is your engagement that is the only way we get out of this. The 2018 elections are on the horizon. You need to be organized. You need to be mobilized. And on that upbeat note, I'll stop and I will see you on Wednesday.